In its first year of operation, the division would amass more than 200,000 files on radical activities. The Justice Department's efforts did little to ease the fears of Americans who saw revolution in the labor unrest sweeping the country. In September, just weeks after the formation of the first American Communist parties, steel workers nationwide walked off the job. Coal and railway workers also threatened to shut down. The walkout of 3/4 of the police department in Boston threw the city into chaos.
They were branded as Bolsheviks because it was inconceivable that they could have done this on their own.
Everything feeds this kind of atmosphere of hysteria, that agitators, red agitators, are stirring up people to engage in this kind of social disorder, this kind of violent behavior. So people feel they're living on the edge.
As letters calling for government action flooded Congress, senators demanded Palmer explain why he had not yet taken action against those attempting to bring about the forcible overthrow of the government. On November 7, 1919, Palmer silenced his critics. He launched a raid on the second anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution to send a message that America was fighting back against communist influence. With Hoover serving as the point man in Washington, agents arrested several hundred members of a group he had been monitoring, the Union of Russian Workers.
It was a quite violent affair, designed as much for political effects and for theater as well as actual breaking up of these radical organizations. The government was now actively cracking down on radicals, and they wanted that message out there.
Hoover commandeered an army transport ship to carry 249 detainees back to Russia. In a headline-grabbing move, he included two of the nation's most notorious anarchists, Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman. Their celebrity overshadowed the fact that most of the detainees had never been part of a criminal or terrorist plot.
You could call it a publicity stunt, but it was a very major action. They sent the Russians back where they belong. That's how it was portrayed.
The Palmer raids, for all their terror, were really cathartic in the sense that it sort of made most Americans think, well, we've handled those people, and we're not going to hear much from them anymore.
As the deportees left New York Harbor on December 21st, reporters claimed their shouts of "Long live the revolution in America" could be heard on shore. Newspapers celebrated Palmer for taking action.
Palmer was viewed as a strong leader who, in the midst of chaos, was drawing a firm line. He recognized this as a boom, and he very shortly would start organizing a campaign for president of the United States.
Promising no let-up, the Attorney General authorized Hoover to move forward with plans for a massive raid just after the new year. On the night of January 2nd, 1920, Palmer's agents struck simultaneously in 33 cities across the country. Raiding parties swept through meeting halls and private homes, arresting everyone in sight. They seized nearly 5,000 people for deportation. Many were American citizens and didn't belong to any of the targeted radical groups.
Hoover was receiving telegrams and phone calls and messages by the hundreds. Every time there was a legal question, a logistical problem, it would first go to Hoover.
Hoover pretty much ran what are now called the Palmer raids, but might easily be called the Hoover raids.
With support from local police, federal agents herded suspected radicals into detention centers, searched their homes, and confiscated their possessions.
Thousands of people were detained without any warrant, without any specific cause. They were kept for weeks at a time. Some were beaten.
They had no prisons big enough to hold all of these people. In Detroit, they put about 700 or 800 people in a corridor of a government office building with one bathroom, a water fountain, and held them there for 7 or 8 days because they had no place else to put them. In Boston, the person committed suicide because the conditions were so bad.
It sent a real terrifying message through the immigrant community. And I think for the anarchists in particular, this was the final evidence that the American government had declared war on their people.
Soon, it wasn't just radicals who thought Palmer had gone too far.
The evidence started coming out about just how thin these cases were. The fact that very few of these people had any connection with violence or real radicalism, a real threat to the country.
Church, labor, and business groups began questioning Palmer's tactics, which had failed to produce the May and June bombers or evidence of a future plot. Even within Palmer's own Justice Department, there was criticism. On January 12th, U.S. Attorney Francis Fisher Kane resigned from office in protest. "We appear to be attempting to repress a political party," he wrote to Palmer. "By such methods, we shall drive underground and make dangerous what was not dangerous before."
You've taken people whose opinions you don't like, who have joined organizations that you don't like, and you've arrested them en masse without ever having a court proceeding. Are these people really a threat or are they not a threat, and how are we going to assess that? You get a really big set of questions about what kind of country do we actually want to be?
In the coming months, Palmer's critics gained momentum. The acting Secretary of Labor nullified more than 2,000 deportation warrants, calling the evidence against the deportees flimsy. Palmer tried to focus public attention back on the Red Threat, claiming that he had received intelligence warning of a revolutionary upheaval on May 1st. When the day passed peacefully, Palmer was ridiculed for being an alarmist. A month later, a damning report by 12 prominent lawyers accused the Attorney General of utterly illegal acts which have struck at the foundation of American free institutions. Congress summoned him to Capitol Hill to defend his deportation raids.
At the end of it, Palmer is very frustrated. He saw the country call on him, demand him to take this hard line, and he did what he thought was his responsibility with the information he had before him. The hard part, though, is figuring out how you come up with something that addresses the threat, that doesn't at the same time do the collateral damage of sweeping up innocent people who've done nothing to deserve it.
Palmer still hoped he had enough support to win his party's presidential nomination. But when he arrived in San Francisco to appear before the delegates in July 1920, even his close friends regarded him as poor presidential material. The press wrote off the nation's fighting Quaker as the quaking fighter. By the time Palmer left the convention in defeat, hysteria-weary Americans were embracing the Republican nominee, Warren Harding. His campaign dismissed the radical threat and promised to return America to normalcy. On September 16, 1920, the stock market was having a bullish day. Reason for optimism after a bumpy summer. Inside the Morgan Bank, a partner was wrapping up a meeting with the owner of one of the country's largest mining operations about the latest round of strikes in the Pennsylvania coal fields. Across the street, government workers were busy transferring $1 billion in gold to the U.S. sub-treasury. A few minutes before noon, as lunchtime crowds began to fill Wall Street, a postal worker discovered 5 flyers stuffed inside a mailbox, just a short walk from the bank. As the bells of Trinity Church began to toll, he read the alarming words. Moments later, a violent blast rocked the financial district. It began with a flash, then a roar, followed by a force so powerful that skyscrapers 3 blocks north trembled from the impact. Fire-packed air smashed against buildings and burned through the lunch crowd, leaving devastation in its wake.
There's pandemonium everywhere. The brokers on the stock exchange think the glass dome atop the exchange is going to collapse. Trinity Church is shaken to its foundations. It's a terrifying scene.
When people came out from the trading floor, they could still see a mushroom cloud rising above Wall Street. It was hundreds of pounds of dynamite packed into a horse cart. When it went off, it just tore people in half.
Bodies mangled beyond description sprawled amidst the shattered glass. The remains of one man lay in front of the Morgan Bank. The building's pale granite walls stained with splotches of red.
All through the district were these little pieces of metal that were window weights, and they had been packed around the explosives. Many people died from lung injuries, from internal bleeding as these weights penetrated their internal organs.
Most of the dead were under the age of 30 and made a modest living serving the trading houses of Wall Street.
If you set a bomb at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets, the assumption was you were aiming for the biggest men of American capitalism, but that's not who this bombing hit at all. It really impacted ordinary people.